Currently my kids are in their afternoon quiet time, so I have asked them to be quiet. They are downstairs playing. If you're wondering where they are, my youngest is currently having her nap, so we're gonna see how long we have. If you hear any noises in the background, it's just them playing. They're having fun downstairs. But I thought in light of our 9-year wedding anniversary this week, this would be a really good time to just reflect and look over the last 9 years, share with you some wisdom and some things that I've learned along the way. Now, we've only been married 9 years. That's not a very long time. We have much more learning and much more growing to do, but we have come a long way since that wedding day 9 years ago. And there's a lot more that I've learned than the 9 things I'm gonna talk about in today's video. But as I sat down to plan this video, these were 9 things that really stood out for me. So bear in mind that this video is coming from the wife's perspective, from a biblical Christian point of view. It's not coming from my husband's point of view. I will not be speaking for him. This is from me. Things that I have personally learned. I also want to point out that just because I'm sharing these things that I have learned does not mean that I have mastered them. In fact, as I was going through this and planning out this video, I realized there's a lot that I really need to brush up on, a lot that I really need to keep myself accountable for and work on. So I'm sharing these with you today, but I am by no means an expert. I never will be. I will always be learning. I will always be growing. With that, I think we'll just dive right in. I have my Bible here. I really wanted to make sure that everything that I'm talking about is truly based out of scripture, because I don't want to share anything that isn't biblically sound. So I pray that this really touches your heart today and that you could come away from this video with some takeaways that will help improve your marriage. Okay, number 1, to serve without expecting anything in return. This really applies to all areas of life, but especially so in marriage. In fact, whenever someone asks my husband for marriage advice, the first thing he always says is to always strive to outserve the other person. Because marriage is not about oneself. Marriage is about being together. It's about each other. It's about sacrifice and service to one another. I think back to my early marriage days and I realized just how selfish I was. And I didn't realize it back then, but since then the Lord has really opened my eyes. If I were to go out of my way to do anything for my husband, and I'm talking like really small minuscule things like picking up his socks off the floor, cleaning up his dishes, doing the laundry for a few weeks in a row, even things that weren't necessarily his job, I would expect something in return. I would expect him to do the same for me. I would expect praise. I would expect something from him. And of course, it's always nice to hear praise and to be thanked for something that you've done, but that should not have been my reason for doing those things. God calls us to humble ourselves and to serve one another out of joy and gladness of heart, not because we expect something in return. Mark 10 verse 45 says, "For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many." If Jesus, the Son of God, can come down to this earth and serve us lowly human beings, how much more should I be able to serve my husband out of love and gratitude for him and for God? This concept goes both ways, and since both mine and Zach's top love language are acts of service, this is especially true for our marriage. But again, I'm not speaking for my husband, I'm speaking to the wife. Now, as wives, we have a special role in our marriage because we are called to be our husband's helper. Genesis 2 verse 18 says, "Then the Lord said, it is not good that man should be alone. I will make a helper fit for him." And I just think that's really beautiful that God placed me in this marriage role as his wife to be his helper, someone who loves him unconditionally, will cheer him on, will always be on his side, someone for him to love and adore and provide for. Number 2 is to always assume the best. I'm gonna give you a scenario here, a scenario that I've often seen myself in. So let's imagine that it's been a really long day, you've been home alone with the kids all day, your husband's been at work all day, you've been slaving away making supper, it's all on the table, you're waiting for him to come through that door, and all of a sudden you get the text saying, "I'm gonna be home late. Sorry." What is your initial reaction to that? I know for myself, my first reaction is frustration and anger, primarily because I'm being inconvenienced. And then I begin making up all these negative stories about why he's home late and assuming the worst about his motivation behind being late and not actually getting the truth, not actually hearing his side of the story. Needless to say, there have been times he did not come home to a very cheerful or happy wife. I specifically remember one day this happened. I had dinner on the table, we were ready to eat, I thought he was coming in the door, and then I got the text. And I wanted to get angry, but I also knew how negatively that would impact the rest of our night. So I made a very conscious choice not to allow these lies and negative assumptions to rule over me. Instead, I consciously chose to assume the best. I knew that my husband was not late because he wanted to be late. I knew he didn't want to be at work. I knew he was probably hungry and tired, and I knew the last thing he needed was to come home to a wife who was just really angry with him. Instead, I chose to allow the kids to have their dinner because I knew that they were hungry. And I used the extra time that I had before he came home to make a special dessert, to set the table nice, to light a candle, and set out our plate. So when he came home to a candlelit dinner just for the two of us. The kids went off and played. We enjoyed our dinner. Our evening was dramatically changed because of that one conscious choice that I took. We had a really lovely time, a really lovely conversation. I was able to take something that normally would have been a very negative situation and turn it into something beautiful. I have the power to do that. As his wife, I have the power to make things really great or really bad. Proverbs 14 verse 1 says, "The wisest of women builds her house, but folly with her own hands tears it down." I have the choice to build my home or tear it down, and in that moment I chose to build my house, and it was beautiful. Later on, he admitted that he was actually kind of nervous to come home. He was nervous about how I would react, and that broke my heart. Number 3 is to let go of grudges. This is something I didn't even realize that I did until a few years ago. And these grudges that I was carrying all these years slowly started to build up in me until finally it turned into full-blown rage. After my 3rd child was born, I dealt with a lot of postpartum rage. And now, of course, a lot of that rage was directly related to hormones, but I can't blame it on the hormones. The hormones does not excuse the way that I reacted and the things that I said and the way that I treated my family. If I had just dealt with some of these grudges beforehand, that experience would have been drastically different. It took a lot of hard work. It took a lot of confrontation from the Lord and from those around me to really pinpoint what was going on. And slowly over time, I was able to start letting these things go. And I tell you, when I was finally able to let go of these grudges, I felt like chains had fallen off of my wrists. I felt free. And what's funny about it, or maybe not funny at all, is that these grudges I was holding against my husband had nothing to do with what my husband was doing. He wasn't doing anything wrong at all. These grudges solely stemmed from my own envy and resentment and the bitterness in my heart. It felt so good to let it go. Number 4 is that communication requires listening. We've always been very open with communication within our relationship. Like from day one, we told each other everything. And that is a huge piece of advice that we often give to newlyweds, is to be very open. Like, talk about everything. Don't hide anything from one another. There should be no secrets. But within our communication, I was not holding my tongue. While we do believe it is very necessary to share our thoughts, to share our feelings, I just didn't know when to stop. After a while, I was growing frustrated that he wasn't reacting the way that I wanted him to react, and he was growing frustrated with me because I wasn't listening to him. And when I'm in that mindset, I'm not rational, I'm not thinking clearly. And it took me a long time to realize that I need my husband's calm, sensible state of mind in those moments to bring me back down to earth. As much as I don't want to hear it in those moments, I need to hear it. But he can't do that if I refuse to listen. Communication is a two-way street, right? Like, I can't be the only one who talks and he's only ever listening, because I'm not hearing then what he needs to say to me, and vice versa. If you're gonna talk, you need to be willing to listen in return so that you can communicate properly. The Bible is so full of verses about this, it's great. Proverbs 12 verse 15, "The way of a fool is right in his own eyes, but a wise man listens to advice." It goes on to say that fools show their annoyance at once, but the prudent overlook an insult. Moving on, verse 18, it says, "The words of the reckless pierce like swords, but the tongue of the wise brings healing." That verse is gold. Proverbs 18 verse 13 says, "If one gives an answer before he hears, it is his folly and shame." The Bible is so full of good verses about this. This is just a few, just the tip of the iceberg. I really had to take a page from his book and learn from his own wisdom and his calm demeanor and his ability to listen. He is better at listening than I am. I will readily say that. Number 5 is to pray, not nag. The Bible is very clear about this one. It's funny, actually. Proverbs 21 verse 9, it is better to live in a corner of a housetop than in a house shared with a quarrelsome wife. Verse 19, it is better to live in a desert land than with a quarrelsome and fretful woman. 27, 15 to 16, a continual dripping on a rainy day and a quarrelsome wife are alike. This is just a few of the verses that Proverbs shares about a quarrelsome and nagging wife. And when I really think about it, and I'm really honest with myself, I cannot think of one good thing that has become of my nagging and quarreling. So instead, when I want to nag or nitpick or quarrel with him, I am choosing instead to pray for him. The fact of the matter is, no matter how hard I try, I cannot change my husband. It's not my job to change my husband. No one can change another human being. That is something only God can do. We can be an encouragement to one another, we can be a positive example to one another, but we can't change the other person. And so instead I pray. And I love on my husband, and I pray that God will do his will. But what I also need to keep in mind is that if I'm praying for my husband and I'm praying for his heart and I'm praying for the Lord's will, that doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to change my husband's heart. Sometimes it's actually my heart that needs a heart check. Number 6 is to greet him with a smile. It's a simple thing, really, but it's easier said than done. After a long day, home alone with the kids, trying to get supper on the table, everyone's hangry, he's often greeted with a child shoved at him and an exasperated wife, kids screaming, house a mess. That's not a fun way to come home. I wouldn't enjoy coming home to a situation like that. I can't think of anyone who would enjoy coming home to that. Proverbs 17 verse 22 says, a cheerful heart is good medicine, but a crushed spirit dries up the bones. Again, this isn't an easy thing to work on or an easy thing to change. It takes a conscious effort. So if I know when he's coming home, I try to take a few minutes before he comes through the door to get myself put together, get the kids a little bit put together, maybe tidy up a few things in the house and get the kids involved in this too. Like they can help pick up things and they can help get things in order so that when he does come through the door, he's not coming home to utter chaos. He's coming home to hugs and kisses and a wife and family who adores him. Putting myself in his shoes, how much better would it be to come home to a loving, adoring wife and children than a home of utter chaos? Now, of course, it's not picture perfect every time he comes home. I'm not trying to put on an air of everything is great, everything is lovely, things are perfect, nothing went wrong today, but I'm at least putting in that effort to greet him with a smile, and that is worth so much. Number 7 is to fixate on his strengths and overlook his faults, and this is something that I've really learned from my husband. He's really good at this. I know there are a number of things that I do that are just bad habits that really annoy him. But instead of being grumpy about it or nagging me about it or rubbing it in my face, he just takes care of the problem and he moves on and he doesn't let it bother him. And he's really, really good at that. He fills in the areas that I'm lacking and I do the same for him. And what a joy it is to fill in the areas where he needs me to fill. And he does the same for me. When I allowed myself to just constantly fixate on all those things that irritated me, I lost sight of the man I loved. In 2 Corinthians 10 verse 5, Paul tells us to take every thought captive to Christ. Philippians 4 verse 8 is one of my favorite verses. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. It doesn't say think about the things that bother you. It doesn't say think about all the things that make you angry. It says think about these things, these lovely things, commendable things, pure things, things that I adore about my husband, not things that I don't. I read a really good quote recently that says the way that you think determines how you will feel, and how you feel influences the way you will act. That makes me think about Luke 6 verse 45, which says, the good person out of the good treasure of his heart produces good, and the evil person out of his evil treasures produces evil, for out of the abundance of the heart his mouth speaks. So within my heart I was carrying all of these negativities, and that was coming out of my mouth, that was consuming all that I was. And I know I talked about this before, I feel like I talk about this all the time, but it's really powerful. It is a choice I make every single day to really focus on the good and not the bad. And again, this goes for so many areas of life, like every aspect of life. It is especially beautiful when it is applied to your marriage, to be able to focus on all of the things that I adore about him and love about him, all the things that I fell in love with. It really puts my heart in the right place and is so beautiful for our marriage. Okay, we're almost done here. Number 8 is to take time for him. I remember before we got married, I always thought, I'm not gonna be the wife who never has time for my husband. Like, I'm always gonna have my time for my husband. He's my best friend. I'm gonna spend all this time together with him and it's gonna be awesome. And then life happened and we both had jobs we had to go to every day. And then we started having kids and more kids and life just got really busy. Before I knew it, I became that person who wasn't spending enough time with her husband. The exact person I swore I would never be. As life got busier and busier, we realized we had to sit down and really reprioritize things here. Like, what's really important and what's not so important. And marriage was right at the top of that list. So why were we not making an effort for it? We realized that in these busy seasons of life, that's gonna mean sacrifices. That's going to mean me not doing some of the things that I wanna do just to spend some time with him. It means going out of my way to be by his side. Never once have I regretted sacrificing something that I wanted to do to be with him, because what we got out of that time together was far better than what I would have gotten out of an evening alone. The last one, number 9, is to pray for him. And again, it sounds so simple, but without making the conscious effort to do it, it's something that I just forget to do. We are called to pray without ceasing. We are called to be in constant communication with our Lord and Savior. That means praising him, that means laying our hearts out before him, and it means praying for the things that we love and hold dear. And my husband is right up there. But how often do I actually take time to pray for him? Our husbands need our prayers. Prayer is so much more than just loosely speaking a few words to God. There is power in prayer. James 5 verse 16 says, the prayer of a righteous person has great power as it is working. We have reassurance. It says in the Bible, we have reassurance that God hears us. He's listening to us. There is power in prayer. Now, if you're like me, sometimes it's overwhelming knowing that you need to pray for someone or pray for something, but you don't know what specifically to pray for. I will leave a link in the description box for an article that just gives you some ideas, like a starting point of things specifically to pray for your husband. A piece of advice I heard from someone a while ago was to pick something, like a mundane task, something you do every single day, and every time you do that task, pray for so-and-so. For example, when I am nursing my daughter, I'll pray for her or I'll pray for my kids. When I'm folding laundry, I will pray for the members of my family whose laundry I am washing and folding. I've heard people use stopping at a red light as an opportunity to pray for someone. It could be washing dishes, like while you're washing dishes, take that time to consciously pray for someone. While you're cooking dinner, while you're vacuuming the house. These daily tasks serve as great reminders to pray for those we love, especially for our husbands. Okay, that is the end of today's video. I hope that you enjoyed. It was a little bit different than some of my usual content, but I hope that this really spurred you on and encouraged you in your walk with the Lord and in your marriage. If you have any advice for wives that you want to share, please leave it in the comments below. And I encourage you to use the comment section as a place to spur one another on, to encourage each other, to lift each other up. Let's make it a really positive, welcoming place to be. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye.